George Bowling is 45, comfortably fed, and quietly panicked. He sells insurance, lives in the London suburbs with his wife Hilda and their kids, and moves through the days like a man being carried downstream. He can feel the approach of something enormous, history, war, collapse, pressing in on ordinary life, and it makes his own comfort feel strangely fragile. Even his safer life feels like it's sitting on thin ice, waiting for the first crack. The book opens on a cold day when George takes time off for a painfully ordinary mission, new false teeth. But the streets won't let the day stay small. Even before he gets where he's going, the city feels like it's broadcasting anxiety through shop windows and passers-by, as if fear has become the shared public language. It's an environment where you don't seek bad news, it hunts you down. Then a single poster yanks a hidden lever in his brain, King Zog of Albania. The name hits him like a weird spell. Zog becomes Og, the old biblical king of Bashan from church, and suddenly George's mind slides backward as if the present has lost traction. It's a reminder that memory isn't always a choice, sometimes the mind grabs a different time the way a drowning person grabs a plank. That one ridiculous headline becomes the trapdoor his whole past spills through. This is Orwell's pre-internet doom-scrolling, information as atmosphere. George isn't catching up on the news, he's inhaling it, absorbing crisis in fragments until it becomes a mood that lives in his body. The effect isn't knowledge so much as agitation, the constant drip of menace that makes stillness feel irresponsible and peace feel temporary. Instead of feeling prepared, he feels possessed by the future. Lower Binfield, his childhood town near the Thames, rises in his imagination like an oxygen pocket. In memory, everything had edges and rules, the market, the church, the fields, the small human dramas that didn't pretend to be global emergencies. He doesn't just miss the place, he misses the sensation of living in a world that doesn't demand your attention every minute. Lower Binfield becomes less a town than a promise that life can still be quiet enough to think. George's father runs a modest seed business, and young George learns what ordinary used to mean: local names, local loyalties, money that moved hand to hand instead of through faceless systems. But even inside these warm recollections, Orwell threads in the first tremors, progress creeping in, scale replacing craft, big forces starting to press down on small lives. George's nostalgia is already tinged with a sense that something is being quietly stolen, not by villains, but by momentum. Even as a boy, he feels the small world shrinking under bigger, colder rules. George's favorite sanctuary is fishing, especially the dream of one particular pond, half real, half legend, where giant carp supposedly lurk. He carries that pond like a private myth, proof that somewhere there's still a place untouched by noise, where patience is rewarded and time isn't chopped into frantic pieces. The pond becomes a stand-in for innocence itself, the idea that life can still contain secrets that aren't being sold, managed, or paved over. It's his private proof that the world might still have one unspoiled corner. As he grows up, he remembers embarrassment, desire, class shame, small humiliations, the stuff that doesn't look historic but shapes a person permanently. The past, for George, isn't a museum. It's a storage room full of feelings that were never fully put away, and the more pressured the present becomes, the more those old feelings rattle on their shelves. Orwell lets you hear the truth underneath the nostalgia. George isn't only remembering, he's reliving. War arrives in his story not as heroism, but as looming machinery. George reflects on the First World War and the way his generation learned to expect disruption, to live with dread as a background hum. Even when he's lucky, even when he's safe, the idea of history as something that happens to you gets welded into him, so peace always feels like a pause rather than a promise. That's why the new war feels less like a surprise and more like a scheduled return. Now, in the late 1930s, that dread hum is back, louder. George notices how everyone talks about bombs the way people talk about weather, half joking and half bracing themselves. He can picture rooftops and train lines and think, automatically, where the damage would spread, as if the imagination has been trained to rehearse disaster. The future has moved into people's mouths, turning fear into everyday small talk. Here's the trap: the news doesn't just inform him, it trains him. The more he consumes it, the more he sees the world through it. It's paper doom-scrolling, headlines, posters, street corner arguments, casual conversations that keep refreshing the same fear until it feels inevitable, and George finds himself both repelled by it and weirdly unable to look away. He hates the sensation, but the habit has teeth. Once it starts, it keeps biting. Then George gets a secret. He wins a modest sum betting on a horse race, small money, but it feels like a stolen passport, and he hides it from Hilda. The secrecy is intoxicating because it gives him something modern life has been starving him of, a private choice that doesn't require permission, explanation, or negotiation. For once, the future feels like something he can steer, not something that steers him. At home, life is crowded and loud in a familiar way: domestic friction, money worries, routine complaints, the constant demand to be normal. George loves his family, but he also feels trapped inside the role of husband-provider cog. He senses that if war comes, the role will harden into a prison, so this secret money feels like his last chance to be a person rather than a function. It's not that he wants to abandon them, he wants to remember he exists inside himself. He tests the idea of escape by visiting old Porteus, a retired schoolmaster, someone who once represented wisdom and steadiness. But the visit doesn't revive George, it depresses him. The meeting becomes proof that the past isn't automatically comforting, because people age into their own disappointments, and old conversations don't always unlock old air. Instead of relief, George gets a warning: you can revisit yesterday and still suffocate. He tries, too, to sit through the political noise of the era, the meetings, the slogans, the righteous fury, and he recoils. Not because he's pure or apolitical, but because he senses something corrosive, people feeding on hatred and calling it clarity. It's outrage as entertainment, conviction as addiction, and George sees how easily crowds turn fear into a performance that makes everyone feel busy while nothing truly gets understood. It's the same mechanism as doom scrolling, constant stimulation that leaves you emptier than before. And that's the moment George commits. He decides to spend his hidden winnings on a private pilgrimage back to Lower Binfield, coming up for air. The plan is simple: find the old places, feel the old feelings, locate that pond, and prove to himself that something untouched still exists, like testing whether the world still has one pocket of silence left. He isn't chasing a vacation, he's chasing a way to breathe. Even the journey refuses to cooperate. Everywhere he goes, modern life presses in: new buildings, new rhythms, a country being rebuilt into something faster and harsher. George realizes with a sting that you can leave your house, but you can't always leave the mental climate you've been living in, because anxiety travels inside you like contraband. The feed follows him, if not in print, then in his nervous system. Lower Binfield hits him like a wrong address. The town of his memory has been reshaped, development spreading, landmarks altered, familiar routes broken. He keeps trying to overlay his childhood map onto the present, but it won't line up, and every mismatch feels personal, as if time itself has been rearranged to exclude him. It's like walking through a dream where all the doors are in the wrong place. He finds the old pub he meant to stay in, expecting an anchor, and discovers it's changed too: same shell, different soul. The past isn't simply destroyed, it's repurposed. George begins to understand that modernity doesn't always arrive with violence, it arrives with substitutions, until you suddenly realize the thing you loved is still there but no longer yours. Even familiarity becomes a kind of con: it looks right until you listen closely. Then he sees his childhood home and gets one of the cruelest shocks: it's been turned into a tea shop. A private space, his father's world, has become a product, nostalgia sold back to strangers by the cup. That transformation tells George something brutal: the modern world can digest even your most personal history and serve it back as decor. In one glance, his childhood turns from memory into merchandise. He runs into an old girlfriend, and the encounter lands even harder. Time has done what time does: erased the person he stored in memory and replaced her with someone real, worn, complicated, and she doesn't recognize him. In that moment, George feels how nostalgia edits people into symbols, and how reality returns them with details you never asked for but can't deny. He realizes he hasn't been missing her, he's been missing the person he was when he knew her. Underneath it all, George keeps circling the story of his father's decline: the seed business squeezed by larger competition, the small shop slowly smothered by scale. Progress isn't a villain with a face, it's a system with momentum. George's anger sharpens because he can name what's being lost, not luxury, but a style of life where people had time, privacy, and dignity that wasn't measured by efficiency. And the more he looks around, the clearer it becomes that the same crushing forces are still accelerating. Finally he goes after the grail, the pond, the giant carp, the unfinished moment he's carried for 30 years. But the pond is gone, drained and ruined, reduced to a rubbish dump. It's the book's heartbreak in one image. The place he believed might still be untouched has been flattened into waste, and the myth that kept him going collapses in the stench of real, physical change. It's not just a lost fishing spot, it's the moment his last refuge is officially cancelled. And Orwell refuses to let George even keep the illusion a little longer. A bomb falls on the town, sudden, senseless, a glimpse of the war that everyone has been talking about as if talk could contain it, and the future steps out of rumor into reality. George goes back home with no rescue, no regained youth, just the bleak, modern understanding that the news can colonize your mind, nostalgia can't save you, and the world is already leaning over your shoulder. The title's promise becomes painfully literal. He surfaced for air, and discovered the air itself is turning poisonous. Consider subscribing if you enjoyed this summary. Let us know what book we should do next. We hope to see you in the next video.